All right, let's go ahead and take our places, and we'll open with prayer. And I'm going to ask Brother Kim, if you will, pray for us, and we'll get started.
Father, thank you. We are here to study your word. And through this wonderful time, we want to take a step forward to you. At this time, that with the pastor and on our heart to receive your precious word. And I pray in his name.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Wow. Let's pray again. We prayed, people materialized. All right. Turn to Jude chapter 1. We're going to begin by looking at one verse, and I'm going to kind of back up and review and then pick up where we left off. And so remember, we were dealing with a recovering cult follower, somebody who comes in to the church and they're coming out of a cult and they're recovering. Naturally, the most important need that anyone has is salvation. And so Jude chapter 1 verse 22 says, "And of some have compassion, making a difference." When it comes to ministering to unsaved people, no matter who they are, no matter what's going on, no matter what the situation entails, there should always be compassion in us for the lost. And this is going to be a very big need, especially when dealing with people who are involved or were involved in cults. And so we were looking at some influences, and one of the things we looked at was influence of past prejudices. If you remember, bringing in superiority complexes or inferiority complexes. Then the influence of past superstitions, because one of the things that cults do is bring in a whole realm of superstitions. And then past losses. We were talking about past losses, and we looked at several types. One was the loss of time, the loss of finances, and then there was the loss of family. We touched on the loss of morality and the loss of identity, because they don't know who they are anymore. They have to find out who they are. And we have to pick up here and end with the last one was the loss of social skills. And this is caused by social isolation, depression, a lack of meaningful communication, sometimes physical abuse, mental abuse, substance abuse. All of these things will contribute to a lack of social skills. And if you've known anybody who has characteristically had any of those problems in their life, whether they were in a cult or not, you can see where they're awkward. They're awkward in a social setting. What do you do with somebody who is awkward in a social setting? Well, you recognize that they're awkward in a social setting and you help them. Sometimes you're dealing with people that are maybe not even in a cult. They could be, maybe they're autistic, or maybe they're dealing with mental issues. Not everyone is born the same. And when you find people like that, you need to, rather than going, boy, I just don't want to deal with that, because they're a soul and they need Jesus just as well as everybody else. So there can be a loss of social skills. There can also be the withdrawal from culturally accepted norms, which leads to or is contributed to with a loss of education and job skills. You take a person who is involved in a cult, a lot of times they'll quit their jobs and they'll take themselves out of the workforce to be the follower of some, Maharaji somewhere or something else, and that's their life for several years. What does that mean? It means that they're going to lose skills. I've been retired from the Air Force for over 20 years now, and I sometimes, just out of the sake of curiosity, I'll go out on the internet or go out on YouTube to look at some of the new developments in the Air Force with airplanes or munitions or that sort of thing. And I'm looking at things that I have no idea what they are anymore. This is new development. So if they were to take me and throw me back in, I couldn't function. I would have to go back and learn some things in order to function. So you take somebody that's involved in a cult and you take them out of their work environment, and for several years they're, following, their cult leader, whoever it is, and then they come out of that, and then they try to go back into the same work environment they came out of. They're often not able to do so very well. So, you know, let's face it, cults and world religions are fairly well accepted in society. Generally speaking, in America, you can be just about anything you want, religion-wise. And so because of that, you're going to associate with people like that are in the workforce or returning to the workforce or in the church, coming back into the church. And they're not going to be able to do a lot of things that you would think that they'd be able to do. They'll come in talking about, going to the University of, North Carolina or wherever, and they've got a PhD in whatever. But now, because they've not done that for a number of years, they don't know much anymore. And you can't expect them to function on that level. So what do? Well, we help them. I mean, I can't help a doctor be a doctor, but I can encourage him. So we help them in any way we can. These are losses that they are going to face. There are some people that, maybe they're involved in a cult, but we're very comfortable around them. For example, we have some children in our school. We know the parents very well. We make it a point to try to make contact with or witness to them on a weekly basis. And they are not Christians by any means. They're Hindu, and yet we are comfortable around them. You can be comfortable around them. Are you quite finished? That's not going to save you. It's got to be green clothing. Yeah, you're going to get pinched. No question. Okay, all right. So, and then there are others that we do feel uncomfortable around. I mean, if I had to work side by side with a guy that was wearing some kind of robe and had a funny haircut, I would be uncomfortable around that. And yet I have to get beyond that to help, these people. The bottom line is there is no single answer to meeting all of these things that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. Everybody is different. Every need is different. Everyone has a different culture. Even in America, you would think, okay, he's an American. He's got American culture. No, not so much. We got the South. We got the North. We got the Midwest. We got those guys way out in California. I like to call California the land of, I like to call it the granola state. Fruits, nuts, and flakes. So you got all kinds of cultures going on just in one country. So don't get the idea that one size fits all. You need to prayerfully seek the Lord's help when you're seeking to help a cult follower who is recovering, to help get them back into normal life. And it takes a lot of time. It can be very trying, but the love of Jesus is the key. And so you've got to remember to do that. In the end, however, it's very rewarding. I could tell you the story of a lady whose hat is on the wall here somewhere. She was a Moonie. She got saved. I told you how she got saved. And she shared with me that it took a couple of years for her to get back to a level of normalcy. And I got to tell you that when she came here, she wasn't exactly normal. You know what I'm saying? She still had some issues that she was dealing with. What do? Well, you try to help them, okay, as best you can. Rejection of someone who is odd is bad, okay? You never want to do that. If somebody is odd, they're odd. You love them with the love of Christ and you move on, okay? And you deal with situations as they arise. Any questions on that? Because now we're going to move on to the next section where we're going to deal with cult influences in your church. This is where the rubber meets the road. Cult influences in your church. Make no mistake, the more of an impact that our church or any church has on its community, the greater the possibility that a cult member will seek to infiltrate your church. Let's put it on spiritual terms. When we are doing for God what we need to be doing for God, be sure that the devil is going to try and hinder that. That is a fact. When you, as an individual, are trying to serve the Lord as best you can be sure that the devil is going to try to hinder that. We need to understand that when our church is doing what it needs to be doing, that there is the real possibility of a cult member who will seek to infiltrate the church. And I know it sounds conspiratorial, but it's not. It's Bible, and I'm going to show you some passages in a moment. It's a known practice among cults to try to move in. I mean, we were reading about that in Jude a couple of weeks ago. Certain men crept in unawares, right? What's their purpose? Well, their purpose is, there's really 4 different things that they do. They'll try to corrupt the church, either morally or in some theological way, or try to reduce its effectiveness, a little bit of a distraction there to keep us from staying focused on what we're supposed to be focused on. Sometimes they just want to totally destroy the church, and then other times they just want to convert the church. Turn to Acts chapter 20, and if you think that this sounds conspiratorial, it's not. This is biblical. This is Bible. This is fact. Acts chapter 20, verses 28 through 31. I need a volunteer. Who wants to read that? Acts chapter 20, 28 through 31. That's 4 verses. Go ahead.
Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves, and to all the flock, over the which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn every one night and day.
Now, Paul has called the elders of the church of Ephesus out, and he's giving them some instructions, and he's telling those elders to take heed, therefore, unto yourselves. Be careful, leaders, and to all the flock. Take heed to the flock. So, as a pastor, I have to be careful. I have to watch myself, and I have to watch the flock. And I have to make sure that I am very diligent in doing so. Why? Because, as he says in verse 29, Paul says, after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. In other words, they're going to come in and they're going to destroy the flock from the inside. They're going to come in to do that. But even more so, notice what he says next in verse 30. Also of your own selves. And I wonder, I don't know how many elders from the church of Ephesus were there at that time. Let's just assume that there were 5 or 10 of them. And he says, also among yourselves. And now suddenly they're looking around saying, oh no, somebody here could. Yes. This especially becomes very prevalent when you're dealing with large churches where you have a large staff. And there's, you could have churches with a staff of 15 to 20 to 30 people on staff. And I'm not talking about the guys that, clean the whiteboards or vacuum the hallways. I'm talking about people that are teaching and preaching in Sunday school or in various services. They're going to be the ones, as Paul says here, also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. So Paul says they're going to come in from the outside, and also from the inside they're going to rise up. So if I sound conspiratorial when I say that cults will seek to destroy us from the inside, I'm okay with you thinking that because I'm in the same category as Paul. He sounded a little more conspiratorial than I did, but it's Bible truth. This is what happens. And so what does he tell us to do? Watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears. Now, we need to be on guard. We need to be watching. Haven Baptist Church, we have had probably 30 visitors since the beginning of the year, if not more. We've had 3 people get saved in the last month. Friday night was tremendous. We were able to share the gospel and spend time talking to people, not just handing out literature, but engaging in long conversations with people. Things are happening. Do you think that the devil is going to sit idly by and let this go on? No. He's going to attack. He may already well be attacking. So what do? Well, what does Paul say do? Watch, be on guard, keep your eyes open. An interesting point that many people do not understand is that many cults begin with leaders who did not intentionally seek to mislead the people. They were not trying to mislead. They just started believing something, and they started teaching what they were believing, and the next thing you know, a cult develops. I've got a couple of examples for you in the book. The first one is a man named Jim Jones. Anybody remember Jim Jones? The massacre in Guyana. I think it was Guyana, right? Yes, Guyana in, I forget the year. It was a long, long time ago. And 900 people committed suicide because Jim Jones said that they needed to. Well, he began as a Methodist lay preacher. He started out as a preacher in Methodism, and he left the church. Why? Because at that time, the Methodists would not integrate blacks into the congregation. They wanted white churches and black churches, and Jim Jones says that's wrong. And he's right. So he got upset about that, and he left. Took a group of followers with him. Somewhere along the line, he began to go off the deep end. I don't know how else to put it. He was so well known that Jim Jones actually got an audience with President Jimmy Carter at the time. Now, there's a lot of preachers in America, and most of them never got a chance to talk to Jimmy Carter, but he did because he was so influential. He didn't like the press looking into his business, so he gathered up his followers, and they went down to Guyana, bought a piece of land, and built their own little community down there called Jonestown. And that's where all the bad stuff happened. So he didn't begin thinking, you know what, I think I'm going to go out and start a cult. That wasn't his thinking at all. That's just what happened. Watch, Paul said, to take heed to yourselves. He kind of missed that part. Then you got David Berg. They nicknamed him Moses. David Berg of the Children of God. He started with the Missionary Alliance Church, and I'll say that they're not like us. There are practical differences, some doctrinal differences. They're not altogether doctrinally sound, but they're certainly not a cult. So he didn't begin to be a cult leader. It just kind of turned into that. So it happens how? Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, one of the very first things we learn about the devil is that he is what? Subtle. He is subtle. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be, this week we're preaching the Trinity, and next week all of a sudden we're teaching what the Mormons teach. It's not going to happen like that. It happens slowly, small baby steps to get people to buy into it, to accept that, and to go with it. So we need to understand it's not going to happen quickly. It's going to take time. A few years ago, we had someone in our midst. They were in our midst for 5 or 6 months. It might have even been longer. I don't know. They were a cult member. It only came to light when a known cult member blew the fuse. If you understand what I could tell you more detail later if you're interested. But we didn't know. For months, we didn't know. They're not going to just come in and say, "Hi, I'm a wolf. Any sheep around here I can eat?" They're going to come in subtly. An evangelistic church. And I want to pause for a moment and explain something. Yes, there are dangers there. Yes, there is the probability that this will happen. However, we cannot view every person that comes in with suspicion. We cannot look at them and go, "Well, I don't know, let's get rid of that person because they don't." We need to be evangelistic to every person that comes in. We are not fruit inspectors, but when you bite into fruit and it tastes bad, then you'll know. Right? We need to be evangelistic. But an evangelistic church is going to have a variety of people from all walks of life, from all different belief systems. And so the probability of having influences in your church from those, who are or were involved in a cult is high. And so what do we do when we get several people that come in who are from a Catholic background, for example? What do they believe? Well, they believe what they've been taught in Catholicism all their life. So if we have like a Sunday afternoon where we have like an open Bible study type of format, and they make a comment and it sounds very, unbiblical or heretical maybe even, or whatever, and it comes out of Catholicism, what do? Well, you gently address that. But at no means do you say, well, okay, well, we got to get rid of this guy. They need to be saved. All right? So we have to keep that in mind. So let's look at some signs of influence. Signs of influence. It may be that a certain cult mentality is already prevalent in the church. That's scary, right? Because now we're all looking around saying, who is it? It's got to be Brother Duke because he's so quiet. He's just waiting to pounce on us. Nah, it's definitely, he's been around here forever. So it's got to be, no, it's the song leader. Yeah, that's who it is. And we could do that if we want, but it's not very helpful. There can be a certain cult mentality that will show itself, and if you begin to study the situation, not looking for the person, but the situation, you may very well find the culprit, all right? I've always been one to say that if there's a problem, it is never helpful, and this is true no matter what we're talking about, whether it's this subject or any other problem that you face, either in church or in life or in family or whatever. When you find the problem, it is never helpful to say, who did it? It is more helpful to find out what can be done to fix it. You understand what I'm saying, right? Let's say you got a 3-year-old and he colors on the wall. You don't really need to ask who did it anyway, because mom didn't do it and dad didn't do it, so obviously little Junior did it. So you don't need to ask the question. So it's not very helpful to go around trying to figure out who made the mistake. What is best is to fix the mistake and then put some controls in place so the mistake doesn't happen again. In the case of the 3-year-old, you take away his crayons. You only let him use them when you're watching, right? The same thing happens in a church. Let's say we come in one morning, we come in on a Sunday morning and the door is left unlocked. I'm the first one here and I walk in and I realize that somebody has come in and taken all of our equipment. The first reaction is to say, who in the world left with the door unlocked? Because you want to wring somebody's neck. But it's not helpful to find that out. What is more helpful is to figure out how we can keep it from happening again. So whether it's in something like that or dealing with cults, we need to take the same approach. Look at the situation, do what you can to make sure that the situation gets fixed and so it never happens again. Now, I've known for a very long time that there is sectarianism in churches. What is that? Well, it's an excessive attachment to a group or a sect in the church. And it's always been that way, always. You go all the way back to the first century. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10. I need another volunteer who wants to read that. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. Go ahead.
1 Corinthians 1:10, I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and the same judgment.
Now, by a show of hands, how many of us believe that we are perfectly joined together? Show of hands. No? Nobody in here believes that the members of the Haven Baptist Church are perfectly joined together? Well, you would be right. We are not perfectly joined together. Do we have big problems that's causing, church, fallouts and stuff? No. But the reality is there are people or there are situations where there can be friction and we are not perfectly joined together. Do you know why? Because we are not perfect. So what happens then? Well, if you are not mature enough to say, you know what? I don't like Mbali. I'm just going to pick on her because she's leaving soon. So I don't like Mbali. She rubs me the wrong way by doing this or that or the other thing. Or she said this or she did that or whatever. And I don't like her now because of that. She offended me. Grow up. I hate the hour and the day in which we live where everybody walks around going, I'm offended. I'm offended. When I was growing up, I was offended all the time. And my dad would say, suck it up. Suck it up, buttercup. Don't whine about it. Be a man. Get tough. That's life. Move on. But nowadays, we walk around trying not to offend everybody and trying to be careful. And, I'm not saying go out of your way to offend people, but, if you get offended, suck it up. For the love of Christ, can we not love one another? Right? We should be able to do that, but we don't because she said this or she did that or whatever, and it offended me. And so now what's going to happen next? Can you believe what she said? Well, she told me she didn't like my tie. How dare she? Yeah, I don't know who she thinks she is. Next thing you know, we're making teams. We got our little team over here and that little team over there. And we've now got schisms over the fact that Mbali said that my tie was ugly. Can you think of anything dumber? We're supposed to love one another and we get offended over something like that? My word to you is if you can think right now, if the Holy Spirit's brought something to your mind, all I can say is suck it up, buttercup. You better pray about it, learn how to forgive people, and move on. Because until we do, we will never get over sectarianism. We will never get division out of our midst. And we cannot function as a body if we are not one. A body's one, right? So that happens in churches all the time. And it doesn't take the cults to come in to do that for us. We do it well enough on our own. Sorry, Mbali. I hope you forgive me. It's hard to combat this way of thinking when those who advocate it are the faithful. And those are the ones that are the problem. The Sunday morning crowd never gives anybody a trouble. Because we know they're a Sunday morning crowd. They come and they go and bada bing, bada boom, that's that, right? It's the faithful. It's the in crowd, the core group, if you will. We're the ones that have to watch out how we view one another. Because the devil knows, where'd Brother Story go? I guess he didn't like my preaching, he ran away. The devil knows if he can divide Brother Story and I, that he can bring great damage. Right? So you ought to know that we're extremely careful to that. Extremely careful. We will not allow it. Now let me give you some indicators to look for. Okay? Indicators to look for. Social indicators. First of all, these are not carte blanche rules for identifying cult influence in a church because the conditions I'm going to describe can happen for a variety of reasons. But here are some signs that if you can identify them, then there is a need to look deeper. Imagine that you walk up to your mirror one morning to comb your hair and you look and you notice a spot on your face that you don't remember seeing yesterday. What is that? What is that? What's that spot? I found one this morning. What's that spot? Well, there's a spot there. What does that mean? I don't know, but we need to look a little deeper, right? So it's the same thing in a church environment. You may see something. It might not mean there's cult influence, but there is an indication there that causes us to look a little deeper. We need to look deeper. So let me give you several things here. First of all, members who express a deep devotion and love to the church or to the leadership of the church, and yet they do not demonstrate the same love and devotion to the Lord, nor do they devote any empathy toward others. In other words, oh, I love my church. Oh, I love my pastor. But then they live like the devil. Look deeper. There's a problem there. Okay? Could it be cult influence? Maybe. Maybe that church or that pastor is going that route. You never know until you look deeper. So it's a social indicator. A second one, an overemphasis on emotional highs during the service by members who are not spiritual at any other time. I visited a church in Alabama where there was a Haven alumni there, and he took me to his church, and I went in, and my place has always been the second row on the left-hand side. It's just my thing. Whenever I go in, that's just my thing. So there I was, and apparently this pastor was also a musician, an accomplished musician in Southern rock gospel. I don't know what, Southern rock, but it's gospel. Anyway, and so, man, he got up there, he got on the piano, and he's playing and he's singing, and everybody's standing up and they're clapping, and I'm just standing there. And he noticed that because I'm on the second row, right? So he saw that, and so in between a couple of his emotional songs, he goes, now there's just some people in here that aren't spiritual enough to just enjoy church. And I was looking at him like, you got to be kidding me. You think I'm going to be back now? Right? What was he doing? He was building up the emotion. What do we build up in a church? Emotion? No. We build up with the doctrine. We build up the spirit. We build up the spirituality of our people, not the emotion of our people. Look, if a person loves Jesus, they're going to be emotional. There'll be times when they're happy. There'll be times when they're sad. There'll be times when they get excited and times when they won't. But that's not what we're shooting for. When you see an overemphasis in any church on emotional highs during the service, you better watch out. They're well on their way. Okay? Cliques. Cliques are organized around personalities in a congregation. Any group will have a leader. This is one of the things I've got a good friend of mine. He is of the Brethren, the Brethren denomination. Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say the Brethren? They don't believe in having a pastor. Okay. So they go to church on Sunday, and then some man in the church will stand up to preach. And so I was kidding with him, and I said, well, are you actually going to tell me that there isn't one or two men that are actually leading this sort of thing? Somebody is leading it. Any group that you have, there's going to be a leader. Someone will rise to the top to be the alpha male or the alpha female. They're going to be the leader. That is natural. That is normal. So what happens in cults is that they are now organized, that you'll find cliques that are now organized around a certain personality in the congregation. A certain person who now has his group, and no one can teach them anymore. They're only listening to Brother Billy Bob because he's got all the answers, right? So when you see that sort of thing happening, it's time to look deeper. One more, and then we'll move on. Both positive and negative peer pressure, which is designed to bring individuals into compliance with the actions of the group. I love to use peer pressure at school. I love it. If I got a class of, 7 or 8 or 9 kids and I'm trying to do something with them, I use peer pressure. I'll tell them no speaking Korean in class. And they won't listen. So I use peer pressure. I'll put the score up on the board and say, okay, this is the way this works. If anyone in this class speaks Korean, the whole class gets a mark. And if you get 10 marks, you lose game day. What happens after that? Somebody will speak Korean, I'll write a mark up, and they'll laugh. Then somebody else will speak Korean, I'll write another mark up, and they won't laugh as much. By the time I get 3 or 4 marks up there, they're not laughing. Then at some point, you start seeing this. Somebody speaks Korean, and somebody else looks over and says, "Don't speak Korean!" Ah, peer pressure. It's working, right? So peer pressure can be used, and it's often used in many ways. However, when it comes to matters of the heart, if you see that sort of thing happening, it's time to look deeper, okay? Because that's the way cults operate. Okay, let's look at some leadership indicators. Why? Because cults have leaders. Leadership indicators. There's been more than one case of leaders who have intentionally taken an otherwise good church down the path to cultism. It's happened. I've been a Christian for a little over 40 years now, and I have seen churches go from good churches to bad churches, really bad churches. It doesn't happen right away. It doesn't happen overnight, but the leaders are the ones responsible. They're the ones who are to take heed to themselves. They're the ones that are to take heed to the flock. They were not on the job, and it happened. So the leadership, they say that everything rises and falls on leadership. How many of you have heard that? Everything rises and falls on leadership. Have you heard that before? That's not true. Ask Moses. Moses was an incredible leader, but he had a bunch of people following him that just didn't want to listen, right? So ask Moses. Not everything rises and falls on leader, but for the most part, the leadership will direct a lot of things. So, with that in mind, we need to keep an eye on it, okay? Cult leaders tend to what? First of all, emphasize some special relationship that they presume to have with God. And I got to tell you, it makes me extremely nervous every time I go to a church or maybe a fellowship meeting or something else like that, and somebody will say, "God told me." When someone says, "God told me something," I get a little, I've been a Christian for 40 years and I've never heard God speak. He's directed me in a lot of different ways, but I've never heard him speak. Or they'll describe a conversation that they had with God. God told me to do this, and I said, "Lord, I don't really want to do that." And they'll describe a conversation as if it was a verbal conversation, and I immediately get a little nervous because that's dangerously close to the next step. We got to be very careful with that sort of thing. Does that mean that they're a cult leader? No, it doesn't mean that they're a cult leader, but that's an indicator, and if you see that sort of thing, you need to start looking deeper. Okay? David Koresh. Who was David Koresh? Does anybody remember? I brought him up a couple of times now, I think. David Koresh was the leader of the Branch Davidians. He didn't begin that way. He started out as a Seventh-day Adventist. There's another one I guess you could add to your list, right? He started out as one thing and ended up as another. He started out as a Seventh-day Adventist and started following this group called the Branch Davidians. And the leader of the group of the Branch Davidians died. And so David Koresh decided that he was going to be the new leader. But the problem was the leader that died had a son, and the son wanted to be the leader. So there were some problems there. And what ended up happening was David Koresh took his little group of followers, and they went off somewhere else. They went to Waco, Texas. They built themselves a compound, and they called themselves the Branch Davidians. And somewhere along the line, they got in trouble with ATF. Who's ATF? Any American know what ATF stands for? I don't know what the A stands for, but the T and the F is tobacco and firearms. Alcohol, that's it. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They got in trouble with them over something, and so they surrounded the compound and told them to surrender, and they wouldn't surrender, and next thing you know, this goes on for about a week, and then somebody starts shooting. And depending upon whose story you read, I don't know who shot first or what happened, but the end of the story is that the compound pretty much got burned to the ground, and a lot of people got killed. David Koresh went off the deep end somewhere, So much so that he believed that he was some sort of Messiah. He referred to himself as the sinful Messiah. If you know anything about the Bible, there is no such thing. Okay? That's what he called himself. People believed it. Why did they believe it? Because they didn't study the scriptures, and the only parts of the scriptures they read were the parts that he read to them, and they only believed it the way he said it ought to be believed, which kind of grates against my Baptistic individual soul liberty, thing. Anyway, so that was David Koresh. Then you have, and remember what we're talking about here, to keep it in context, we're talking about people who believe that they have some sort of special relationship with God, above and beyond the normal person. Sun Myung Moon, for you Koreans, Moon Sun Myung, he believed that his name is somehow prophetic, and that he is, or was, he's dead now, in some way his name was the Word made clear. He died in 2012, so I guess that didn't work out so well for him. But the Moonies aren't dead, are they? They're still around. They got new leadership. They're going new ways, but they're still there. One more, and then I think we'll close and come back and finish this section up next week. Joseph Smith, who was he? What? Wrong guy. Latter-day Saints. Yeah, you're right. I'm kidding. And you said Mormons. Yeah, Joseph Smith. He and his brother Hiram got everything rolling, but Joseph was the main one. And he claimed that the angel Moroni told him where these 5 golden plates were. And he couldn't read the plates, and so that he was provided with a Urim and a Thummim, like in the Old Testament, little rocks or whatever they were. We don't really know what they were. And with the Urim and the Thummim, he was able to read these 5 golden plates, and so he translated it and wrote the Book of Mormon. A little known fact, the original writing, they lost a chunk of it. It disappeared. And they freaked out because that meant that somebody was going to have to rewrite it, and they better get it right, because if somebody comes forward with the other missing part and it doesn't match, there's going to be big trouble. Right? There's an article, I read an article called The Black Hole in the Book of Mormon on that. It's pretty interesting. You ought to read it. But Joseph Smith claimed to be a modern prophet and that he was going to restore Christianity. Now, that is dangerous. Anytime somebody comes along and says, Christianity is corrupted and we need to restore it, that's a problem. Why? Because Jesus promised to preserve his people. God promised to preserve his word. So if the word has been preserved and the people have been preserved, what are you going to restore? Nothing. It's a lie of the devil. Okay? So when you find a leader, any leader, who claims to have some sort of special relationship with God, that is very dangerous. When you see that sort of thing, look deeper. Okay? So we'll stop here. We'll come back next week with cult leaders claiming to have extraordinary knowledge. Okay? We'll come back and take a look at that. Okay? Any questions or comments on what we covered? All right, then let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we got about 14 minutes till service time. And Brother Kim, close us in prayer. Benjamin Kim.
Heavenly Father, thank you for lesson. We've learned our call, and we have known, we understood what Satan does. He is subtle, and he uses his strategies to convert small things, these small things. Please help us to watch on things that Satan uses, and help us be witnesses to preach the gospel to the world, our job and our duty. Thank you for salvation and for your grace. I pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay, so we got about 13 minutes left for the service.